stronger than that. Trouble comes screaming, we always holler back. Don't let it get us down.
Our next speaker is Glenna Yale. She's married to her husband Steve and is the mother of 5 children and 2 wonderful grandchildren. She works as a realtor in the Ollinger Associates for the last 10 years and has been very active in pro-life and other conservative issues, serving as the former president of the Allen County Eagle Forum. Her volunteerism has followed her into the boards of SAFI and the Crossings, which are both educational based. And this past fall, Glenna, like myself, was elected to a school board. In her situation, it's the Fort Wayne Community Schools. She's going to talk a little bit about education reform in general and also public school impacts. And I'd like to welcome Glenna Yale to the podium, please.
Thank you, Kent. As he said, I have been active in the education issues starting in the 90s, early 90s, when outcome-based education was first unveiled. And what you have to understand is there's nothing new under the sun, okay? This education reform movement has been around for many, many decades, and I'm sure Jeannie can attest to that, but the progressives and the leftists have had an agenda to be able to create world citizens, not necessarily to achieve high educational achievement so that our kids will have a great foundation and become productive citizens. Their agenda has been quite different. And I didn't become aware of that until I got involved with Eagle Forum. They've been on the forefront of fighting this federal takeover of our schools for quite a while now. And back in the 90s, we were fighting the Goals 2000, which was, again, another federal program that was being mandated on our states and on our schools. And then also at that time, we were fighting the whole testing, the IPASS test that was being required. Each state was to come up with their own test. Well, we've gone through how many hundreds of millions of dollars of redoing these statewide tests, because we had the IPASS and we had the I-STEP, and now I don't know how many versions of the I-STEP. And we were fighting at that time to not only retain local control, but to make sure that our kids had the foundations in reading, writing, arithmetic, so that when they did graduate, they would be able to either pursue a good career or to go on to college. Unfortunately, we lost those battles in the 80s. And I just want to point out to you 2 books. One is Not With My Child You Don't, and this is kind of by Robert Holland. This just kind of explains the battle that we came up against at that time when the education establishment was trying to force all this down our throat. But parents, again, like Aaron and like Heather, who were working with their children and seeing the type of work that their kids were coming home with, became concerned and alerted and rose up. So this kind of gives you the history of some of the battles that we went through back then. And then the other book I'm going to point out is by B.K. Eekman. It's called Educating for the New World Order. And what these 2 books will do is not only show you the strategies that they use, but also where they're going. Because really, it's not about can the kids read or write. It's will they become good workers who will fit into their idea of the New World Order. So when you hear the word education reform, we naturally think they're trying to improve education. They want our kids to learn more. Wrong. You have to look at it as they're going to take over your schools, and it's unconstitutional. There are laws on the book that prevent them from having a nationwide test. There are laws on the book that Congress has passed that prevent the federal government from having a national curriculum. Why? Because it's too dangerous. If you have the wrong person who's in control of the education establishment and they want to force that perspective on every child across this nation, that takes away parental rights, that takes away the ability to for the local community to ensure that their schools are run properly and that the kids are getting that education that they need in order to become citizens and to function as productive individuals who can achieve their potential. So when you hear education reform, you have to think of elitists in Washington, accountable to no one, who have an agenda, it's been around for a long time, and they're up to no good. Their idea of reform is, for instance, one of the goals that we talk about on Fort Wayne Community Schools, and let me say right here, I am speaking as a citizen, I am not speaking as a Fort Wayne Community School Board member. I have my own opinions, and this is some of the stuff that I've encountered over the years in battling this, the encroachment by the federal government into the school systems, and not necessarily speaking for Fort Wayne Community Schools or the board there. So just want to make that abundantly clear right from the beginning. So the schools talk about eliminating the achievement gap. That means certain segments of poverty are achieving at a lower level than kids maybe who come from a more normal or a background with more advantages. And so they want the achievement of the kids who are successful to be narrow the gap between the kids who struggle. And those kids struggle because they're coming from broken homes, and there's all kinds of problems within society because of the breakdown of the family. But the solution for them is not to help all students to achieve at the best possible level. Their solution is to bring down everybody so that we're equal. Well, that's a disastrous policy, because you can't have a one-size-fits-all cookie cutter policy or approach to education, which Common Core is. Because, first of all, we're all individuals. We all learn at a different speed. Boys are late bloomers, girls catch on to some things sooner. My husband and I have total different approaches to things. He's more right brain, I'm more intuitive. So you can't just force that one style of learning on every child across America. It will be disastrous. And second of all, it takes away local control, and it takes away the teacher's abilities to assess what's going on in the classroom. If you have an experienced teacher, she can tell you within 2 weeks which kids are going to be challenges, which kids are behind, which kids are going to need more coaching, if you will, or more discipline or whatever. But with this new curriculum, they are going to be forced to come in and basically read a script, which means starting with good morning class and then going through that lesson plan. And then the lessons, or a lot of them, are going to be on computers. So guess what? Families are not going to be privy to everything their kids are exposed to. A lot of it's going to be online. As you are well aware, Fort Wayne Community Schools just went through a fiasco with the statewide testing. There were a lot of glitches. I don't know how you could run a statewide test and not actually have a dry run to make sure that all the schools would be able to take the test at the same time, or why you wouldn't, if you thought there might be a problem with capacity and servers, that you wouldn't rotate it around the schools, maybe do elementary on one day and middle school another day, and but nevertheless, this is what's upon us. Now, all the tests have to be done on computers. As a school board member, I'm constantly having budget items brought before me where we have to buy new iPads, or we have to buy new laptops, we have to provide servers so that there's enough access for the computers. And then I got to go into some of the classrooms and see the types of things that the kids are working on with their new computers, which, if you want to believe that everything's hunky-dory and they have the best interests of your child in mind with all these new ideas, then you would be excited about what's happening. But what you don't understand is the mischief that they're up to is insidious. Just like Hillary Clinton had a national healthcare system in mind and pushed for it and worked for it along with Mark Tucker and never gave up. They implemented that while they were busy doing that, and everybody was focused on that. Obama had his people working on implementing this nationwide education takeover. And now that it's here, you have to understand that the people who are behind in designing these careers, like Bill Ayers, who is a radical Marxist, is going to be the one who's going to have a thumbprint on the type of curriculum your kids are going to be forced to master if they want to pass these tests. And you have to also understand that the brainwashing and the propaganda that they will be exposed to from the earliest classes, from kindergarten on, these kids are going to be taught how to resist the authority of their own parents, because they are going to be able to, through biometrics and monitoring their kids through the computer, they're going to be able to tell if they are teaching that homosexuality is a normal lifestyle and that kid resists because of his stance or because of his roll, he rolls his eyes or whatever biometric sensors that they have in place, they'll know that kid didn't get the lesson. And he will be sent for re-education training. And if you have 12 years of a vulnerable mind that has that beat into them, there's no chance. There's no chance those kids are going to be able to come out as an individual, free-thinking, and what that means for our society is this is going to be the enslavement of America, because this next generation is not going to have the opportunity to make those and form those opinions on their own. It's a very sobering and scary thing. So you can imagine my surprise when I was asked to run for school board, and I called a friend of mine, Pat Schneider, who is Eagle Forum past president and very knowledgeable of what's going on in education here in our state. And I said, Pat, just tell me what's going on in education, because while I was active back in the 90s fighting, the federal government's encroachment on education and finding out that, they're not testing knowledge, they're not testing objective knowledge. Can you tell me the right answer to this math problem? Or can you answer this history question properly? They're testing subjective things and behavior because they want to mold. The whole idea is to mold society into the image they want to create. And so you can imagine my surprise when I found out that basically Common Core was in place. It had been adopted by Indiana. Not just Indiana, 46 states across the nation signed on, sight unseen. It's like a bad nightmare, kind of like Obamacare, isn't it? You'll find out what's in it after it's passed, and then we're still finding out all the promises, all the lies, all the promises of how great it was going to be for everybody. Well, now we know it's going to cost everybody more money. We're not going to have the care that we had. Well, here we are with the education. It's already passed. And the two attempts that we've had in the last two legislatures to withdraw from it, we haven't been successful because Mitch Daniels and Tony Bennett had signed on to it, so a lot of the legislators wasn't aware of the problems with Common Core. In fact, nobody basically knows anything about Common Core, and yet every student in our state and every student in those other 46 states are going to be exposed to this. If if the standards really were higher, maybe you could justify it, giving that much power to the federal government, trusting Arne Duncan and Obama to really do what's right for our kids. But I don't know, it's kind of scary that we have very little opportunity now to put the genie back in the bottle. These guys have done a heroic job of sounding the alarm, and other groups like Judy's group has been out there sounding the alarm, but the hour is very late. And I talked to a friend of mine who had an opportunity to sit in on as a parent in a group of educators who were talking about the Common Core as it's being implemented in first grade, because here in our state, kindergarten, first grade have already implemented. Second grade was supposed to come online this year, but we kind of paused it. And then the rest of the grades were going to come online at the end of next year. That kind of got delayed while the legislature is holding some hearings. But unless there's just a massive uprising and people say no, thank you, this is what we're going to get. And so it's. I don't want to sound depressing. I want you to be aware. I want you to open your eyes that we can't just sit back and take all the slogans that you'll hear on the commercials. Like Exxon had a cute commercial about how wonderful Common Core is. They've got big money, and they've got marketing firms who can present their spin. What you're going to have to do is understand that it's here, it's dangerous, it's going to affect every child, because the Parks assessment, which is the state assessment gone national, okay, is also going to be tied into the SATs. So, and they're going to have a dossier, a portfolio on each child, and they're going to monitor those kids' progress. And when I say progress, it's not how well you know your ABCs. It's not do you know your multiplication tables. It's do you give the right answer about the economy and ecology and all these social issues, because they're creating citizens in their own image. So anyhow, thank you very much. But let me just say what I heard, for instance, in first grade. In first grade, they had implemented it, and the teachers all got together. Well, the teachers know what work and don't work, and what they are saying is, we're losing so many kids because the pace that everything is being shot at them. It's kind of like shotgun. There's no review. You have to just keep going with that curriculum because it's a set curriculum. And there's no deviation. So if in the past you were able to kind of set the slow learners aside and have the smarter kids work with them or whatever, you can't do that anymore. You just have to throw it out there. If they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. That means starting in first grade, we've already got kids who are failures, who are going to be behind, and there's no way for them to catch up because of this new way of doing education that Achieve and Obama have been bragging about. It's going to be detrimental to our kids. It's going to be detrimental to our freedoms, and it's going to wipe out local control. As a school board member, right now, we have very little say about the standards because they come from the state level and it's implemented that way. And if we disagree with what's being taught, we have no one to turn to. We would have to go to Washington and talk to someone in a private corporation who's not accountable, not elected, and try and convince them that what they've put into their curriculum isn't working. That's just a nightmare. So anyhow, thank you for your attention.
Our next speaker is Dr. Dawn Kazmierzak. Dr. Dawn Kazmierzak is the daughter of a godly immigrant who grew up in a war zone in the Balkans. Dawn's mother lived under communism, socialism, and Hitler's Third Reich. Dawn is also the mother of an immigrant, as well as her precious daughter is a save from Eastern Europe. Dawn has an undergraduate degree in biology and a doctorate in optometry, specializing in neurobiology. Which are the science classes, right? Dawn did her residency at West Point Military Academy and has been in private practice of optometry for the past 20 years. Dawn is also an author, homeschool mom, speaker, teacher, and lifelong student. Like many of you, Dawn recognizes that you never really learn anything until you must try to teach it to another, and will be accountable for those results. Dawn and her husband, Jim, are privileged to prepare their daughter to be a godly thinker in her generation, and this is why they've chosen to homeschool their daughter. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Dawn Kazmierzak.
You know, we all come with some presuppositions, myself included. So let's lay aside some misconceptions about homeschoolers. For starters, we are not common. Families that have chosen to homeschool their children come from a multitude of diverse backgrounds and often convoluted paths, such as having an extremely gifted child, having a child with developmental delays, having an adopted child. These could all be in the same child. Or it could be from parents who themselves were homeschooled, parents who had personally struggled in their own public education experience, or actually parents who teach in the public education system, who are acutely aware of the realities it entails, and they have intentionally chosen to homeschool their own children. But more and more, the motivation is the children themselves. They are asking to be homeschooled. Increasingly, children who have experienced public education are requesting to be homeschooled or to attend a private school. Let's face it, children are perceptive. They're intuitive. They have a survival instinct. They may not have fully developed frontal lobes, but they operate out of a sheer desire to feel safe and secure. Children today sense the conflict, the chaos, the confusion, and the contradictions in every sector of our nation. We live in a nation struggling with an identity crisis, brought about by decades of amnesia regarding our true foundations. Homeschooling families recognize these foundations and are laboring to provide the stability their children need in order to learn. Homeschoolers are not common, and like many of you, we're not about producing common widgets. Homeschoolers employ a multitude of modes of learning, such that in reality, we do not sit at home. 4% of children K through 12 are now homeschooled. This number has more than doubled over the last 15 years in the United States. Homeschoolers are not common, and we're not huge in numbers. And that being the case, we have been able to avoid, and purposely choose to avoid, the radar. Homeschoolers are keenly aware of the education patterns in Europe, which have consistently acted to oppose homeschooling. Children are deemed wards of the state in many socialist and communist nations. As you've heard, both my mother and my daughter have immigrated from European nations that practice both communism and socialism, my mother under fascism of Hitler as well. Our family has seen first person what centralized education does to nations, which is why we personally are involved in this battle for minding the minds and the souls of Americans. What is common among homeschoolers is the understanding that we, as parents, are responsible for the physical, emotional, spiritual, and academic development of our children. For the majority of homeschoolers, our content and processes are based on absolute truths of knowledge, because the majority of homeschoolers possess, as Jeannie mentioned, a biblical worldview. We are intentional about equipping our children with the cognitive thinking skills and criteria by which to discern, so that our children will become autonomous thinkers, successful in maintaining their unique identities as they become leaders in shaping the future, not just followers in a common core. So why are homeschoolers willing to enter the radar? We all recognize the common threat to our culture via Common Core, shaping the thought of future generations. But how does Common Core pose a personal threat to homeschoolers? Homeschoolers have traditionally scored extremely high on standardized achievement tests. Numerous studies show that homeschoolers perform 30 to 37 percentile points higher than public school peers. Colleges, universities, and academies actively seek out homeschooled students, as homeschooled students consistently maintain higher grade point averages and complete their degrees at higher rates than non-homeschooled students. Homeschoolers partake in a seemingly infinite number of endeavors, which I know Jeannie's kids did here too, from community service, dance to drama, equine to economics, civics, logic to languages, and cross-cultural international trips, and athletics on every turf, course, court, and arena. Homeschoolers are self-starters, autonomous thinkers, and excellent achievers. They are uncommon individuals. The common threat. As standardized achievement tests are now being written to align with Common Core standards, incorporating the ideologies and unproven methods of affective math, social justice literature, which actually that's been pretty effective, humanistic evolution, redefining life, marriage, family, sexuality, and history, these progressive ideologies are in direct opposition to the core values upon which most homeschoolers base their lives and the education of their children. Since the College Board is altering the standardized test of collegiate admission, the SAT, the ACT, as well as the Stanford 10 and the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, which many private schools and homeschoolers use. Here in Fort Wayne, the homeschoolers just took the Stanford 10 3 weeks ago. Homeschoolers face the very real possibility of being ill-prepared to play the "it's all relative, teach to the test" game that is all too familiar for those in government education. And these lower assessment scores and nonconformist attitudes, as Glenna mentioned, they will notice about our kids, will very likely affect the acceptance of homeschooling graduates to colleges and universities aligned with the college accreditation boards. Now this creates a very real disequilibrium. And since homeschoolers are not common, homeschoolers may choose not to play the game, as they find themselves threatened by this very real tyranny over education. A tyranny in which nationalization of education removes parental choice and replaces it with Common Core dictated ideologies that will form the worldview of all children. All education is religious in that it conveys a worldview. These ideologies are not new, yet centralization of the dissemination threatens the very existence of our constitutional republic. Common Core and its tentacles is a clear usurpation of the parental rights and the rights of our children as unique individuals to determine their own educational and career paths. Homeschoolers have entered the radar to unite with all parents, educators, and patriotic Americans against a common foe. Common Core, its databases, and its plethora of invasive satellites. To paraphrase a mentor of ours, an internationally renowned doctor of cognitive psychology, Professor Reuven Feuerstein, parents and educators ought to be more focused on creating intelligence rather than measuring it. This is the underlying mindset of homeschooling, a growth mindset, creating intelligence in individuals rather than cataloging, confining, and controlling via a common core.
Hunkered in the sand, middle of nowhere. The war was raging and he didn't think he'd be spared. He told his buddy, "Guess this is the end." His buddy looked at him, said, "Don't say that again, 'cause